Christmas 1947. Ballarat, Victoria. A 17-year-old boy who has been hunting rabbits to make a quid builds a caravan out of timber and masonite in his father's pub yard because he can't afford accommodation for a Lorne holiday. He has never built anything. He has no engineering training. He has no trade. 27 years later, that same boy is employing 500 workers, rolling out over 200 caravans a week from Wendouree, the biggest caravan brand in Australia. Then he sold up and walked away. 5 years after that, the second oil shock destroyed the Australian family caravan holiday in 18 months. The Wendouree works fell silent. The brand went dormant for 25 years. Today, 7 hand-built vans a week from a Melbourne factory. Different city, different company, different scale, different country. How does Australia's greatest caravan empire end up as a 7 vans a week shell? Before we go any further, if you want to keep these stories alive, I've created a book with the complete Australian lost factories. The workers, the gates, the Australian made, all gone. The link is on the first line of the description. Back to the story. Chapter 1. Rabbits and Masonite, 1947. Ballarat, Victoria. Geoffrey Robertson is 17 years old. He has no job. His father, William Robertson, runs the Town Hall Hotel on Armstrong Street, Ballarat. Money is tight. Geoffrey has been hunting rabbits to make a quid. Then Christmas holiday. His friends invite him to Lorne on the Great Ocean Road. Geoffrey doesn't have money for accommodation, but he has an idea. He will build a caravan. He has never built anything. He has no engineering training. He has no trade. He builds it from timber and masonite in his father's pub yard. Verbatim from Robertson, decades later. The first thing that came into my head was our old family home was called Franklin, and I thought, why not that? The caravan survives the round trip to Lorne on rough 1940s roads. Friends start asking to borrow it. Verbatim from Robertson again. After we got back from Lorne, everyone started asking to borrow it, so I thought, why not build another? Geoffrey builds a second, larger 14-foot van, then a third. His father William tells him, get the vans out of the hotel yard. There's no future in caravans. Geoffrey ignores him. He takes the first van to Melbourne dealer Les Goff & Sons, Hawthorn Caravans, to sell on consignment. Les asks him what the business is called. Geoffrey blurts out the family home name. Les says, verbatim, righto, that'll do. We'll give you a call when we sell it. Then Les kicked him out. The van sold before Geoffrey got home to Ballarat. 2 years earlier, the Second World War had ended. Australian soldiers were coming home. Long service leave, secure jobs, home ownership. The FX Holden was 12 months from launch. Australia was about to start holidaying by Tobar. Geoffrey Robertson had, by pure accident, arrived at the exact moment the Australian family caravan industry was about to be born. He didn't know that yet. He was 17. He had a caravan that sold in 24 hours, and he needed to build another one. Chapter 2. Robbo, Geoffrey Robbo Robertson, the man himself. Born around 1929 or 1930, exact date not preserved in accessible records. His father, William Robertson, was the publican at the Town Hall Hotel on Armstrong Street, Ballarat. Geoffrey grew up above and behind the pub. He had no engineering training, no trade certificate, no caravan industry connections. His only qualification for founding Australia's biggest caravan company was that he built a van for a Lorne holiday because he couldn't afford accommodation. And it worked. Through the early 1950s, he built about 1 van per month behind the pub. He sold the first 15 himself. Then he hired his first workers. Then he moved production out of his father's yard into a first proper factory, a former Ballarat funeral home. Address 7 to 9 Dawson Street North, Ballarat. Nickname Robbo would follow him for the rest of his life. In later years, he lived in Melbourne. He joined the Royal Victorian Motor Yacht Club at Williamstown. He owned a large boat named Aluka, verbatim from Royal Victorian Motor Yacht Club member Paul Whiston. On the record, great guy, remember him from the Royal Victorian Motor Yacht Club. Had the biggest boat, Iluka. He was, per multiple decades-long employee testimonials, a boss workers stayed with for decades. Verbatim from 20-year Franklin employee Lindsay Copeman, I worked for this man for 20 years. Best boss a man could have. Best boss a man could have. That line matters. It will return. Robertson is deceased. Exact death date not preserved in accessible archives. His passing was not recorded in any of the digitised newspaper archives or public genealogical indexes available today, but before his death, he built what would become, for a decade, the single largest caravan manufacturer in Australia. Everything that happened after 1974, everything this script is about to describe, flowed from decisions he made and then one decision he made to walk away. He was, by every worker recollection preserved, a decent boss. Workers stayed for 2 decades. Fathers and sons worked the same production line. The Ballarat community around Wendouree was economically and socially tied to Franklin for a generation. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because the man at the top treats the people building the vans as more than payroll numbers. He was also, by the evidence of what he built, a natural industrial engineer. No trade certificate, no engineering degree, no formal design training, just the ability to look at a caravan, understand how to build it faster, cheaper and better, and then teach a workforce of 500 people to do that at scale. He would take Franklin from a former funeral home in 1951 to being the second caravan manufacturer in the world, to use polycarbonate and aluminium sandwich panels. In 23 years, from nothing. And then he sold. And he didn't say why. Chapter 3. The Funeral Home. Circa 1951. Geoffrey Robertson leases a former Ballarat funeral home as Franklin's first proper factory, 7 to 9 Dawson Street North. He hired his first workers. Production ramped from 1 van a month to a proper industrial line. Victorian places records. Franklin's Caravans, 1951, among the industries then listed on the Wendouree Common. This is the year Franklin Caravans becomes a real company, not a solo teenager's side project, a Ballarat manufacturer. Ballarat historian Graham Chapman would later write, verbatim, one of the casualties was Franklin's Caravans, one of Ballarat's largest industries in the 1960s. One of the largest industries in Ballarat, from a former funeral home. Within a decade, Franklin outgrows Dawson Street. It expands onto Learmonth Road in the Wendouree area, the site that would become the sprawling Wendouree Works. Several acres, full push-along production line, sheet metal shop, upholstery shop, carpentry shop, chassis shop, paint shop, almost every component made on site. Named among the workers of that era, a father and son who worked at Franklin in the 1970s, Frank Tagliabue and Trevor Tagliabue. Verbatim from Trevor, my father Frank Tagliabue and I, Trevor Tagliabue, used to work there in the 1970s. Dad was an electrician and I worked on the line fitting Laminex to the oven unit cupboards. A father and son line worker family. Franklin was, for Ballarat households, a career, not a job. A generation of families depended on the Wendouree factory. Robertson was building an empire that would soon dominate Australian caravan manufacturing, and he was building it out of a former Ballarat funeral home, staffed by families who worked the line side by side. Chapter 4. The Big Five. 1950s and 1960s Australia. The post-war caravanning boom, secure jobs, long service leave, home ownership. The FX Holden, Australia's first mass-produced car, launched in 1948, 12 months after Robertson built his first van. The Ford Falcon arrived in 1960, the Chrysler Valiant in 1962. Australian six-cylinder tow cars, Australian family caravans behind them, the Great Ocean Road, the Sunshine Coast, Kalbarri, Broken Hill, Byron Bay, Merimbula. The Big Lap begins as a tradition in this decade. Australia is starting to holiday by tow bar, and the caravan industry is dominated by 5 names. Industry veteran Ron Chapman on the record, verbatim. Back in those days, Viscount, Millard, Franklin, Chesney and Coronet, they were the big 5 manufacturers in Australia, and all of them were making over 100 caravans a week, some a lot more. Viscount and Millard dominated Sydney. Franklin dominated Victoria. Chesney was in Brisbane. Coronet was founded in Ballarat, 1959, by Ian Farron, literal crosstown rival to Franklin. Millard was founded in 1947, the same year as Franklin, by brothers Jim and John Darlington in Sydney. Both companies started with a single, hand-built van, both in the same post-war year. Both would rise to dominate Australian family caravan manufacturing. Both would fall together 32 years later in 1979. But that comes later. For now, in the 1960s, Franklin was, per Caravan Industry Association of Victoria CEO Rob Lucas, verbatim. The Franklin brand was very iconic. In the 1970s, Franklin was the biggest caravan brand in Australia. Biggest in the country, from Ballarat. Chapter 5, Little Ripper, October 1970, Caravan World Magazine, Issue 2. The reviewer visits the Franklin Wendouree works. He drives away in a 12-foot 6-inch 4-berth Franklin. He loves it. He writes, verbatim, Franklin has long been known for its smooth production methods and low prices. But this was the first time I'd realised they'd caught up with some of the more expensive vans when it comes to quality and careful finish. The van is the Franklin Regent, Franklin's Little Ripper, 12 feet 6 inches, 4 berths, 1200 weight, 609 kilograms, priced at 1,510 Australian dollars in October 1970, approximately $20,000 in 2026 money. Iconic curved, aerodynamic exterior, thermocool sandwich construction, box steel chassis, one-piece Rescote floor. Interior in, verbatim from the review, olive and beige linen grain vinyl piped with gold. The reviewer noted the aerodynamic shape, makes them look neat and so suitable for towing, adding, no wonder they are selling in such big numbers today. On the road, verbatim, he wrote, the Regent followed the tow car like a hungry calf follows its mother. A hungry calf follows its mother. That is the line every Australian family who owned a Franklin in the 1970s would recognise. The Regent behind a Holden Kingswood. The Regent behind a Ford Falcon. The Regent behind a Chrysler Valiant. Christmas trips to Merimbula, Portland, Yeppoon. 3 weeks of annual leave. Kids in the back seat. Van behind. Also parked at the Wendouree Works during that October 1970 review, the Franklin Freeway, a 6-berth tandem axle van, confirmed in production from 1966, and the Safari, confirmed from 1968. Model line-up building, empire growing. Read that again. 200 vans a week, from one factory, in one Australian city, Ballarat, Victoria. October 1970. 23 years after a 17-year-old built his first van from Masonite in his father's pub yard. Chapter 6. Wendouree, 1974. Peak. Franklin's Wendouree Works occupies several acres on the Ballarat outskirts, corner of Learmonth Road, full push-along production line, sheet metal shop, upholstery shop, carpentry shop, chassis shop, paint shop, almost every component made on site. Time to Rome records 500 workers at the 1974 peak, sourced directly to Robertson himself. Later, industry summaries, concept caravans, and caravancampingsales.com.au cite as many as 600 workers from the mid-1950s to the late 1970s. Both figures are attributable. Both reflect the same reality. For 2 decades, Franklin was one of Ballarat's largest employers. Whole neighbourhoods depended on the Wendouree factory. Production, 200 plus vans per week. Franklin was, per Caravan Industry Association of Victoria, the biggest caravan brand in Australia. Franklin was also, per Van Gogh Collections, only the second caravan company in the world to build vans from lightweight polycarbonate and aluminium sandwich panel construction, the Trueline moulded thermo panel system. Not just biggest by volume. First, by engineering. From Ballarat, Victoria, 90 kilometres northwest of Melbourne, 27 years after a 17-year-old built his first van from timber and Masonite in his father's pub yard on Armstrong Street. 200 caravans a week, every week, from one factory, rolling out to dealers in every capital city, rolling into caravan parks from Cape York to Wilson's Promontory, rolling behind Kingswoods, Falcons and Valiants on every long-distance holiday route in the country. To put that peak in context, at 200 vans a week, Franklin was producing more than 10,000 caravans a year. Every one of them made in Ballarat, every one of them sold, mostly, to an Australian family, the Regent behind a Kingswood on the Hume Highway, the Freeway parked at a caravan park in Anglesea, the Safari at Merimbula, the Arrow at Yeppoon. Every capital city, every coastal town, every inland roadhouse from Bourke to Kalgoorlie, you would see them. The model lineup at that peak included the Freeway from 1966, the Safari from 1968, the Regent from around 1970, the Arrow from 1971, and the Hunter from around 1974. 6-berth tandems for large families. 12-foot 6-4 berths for young couples, 15-foot pop-tops, off-road capable models for the outback tourers. Whole range, whole market, the empire is at its peak. And then, the founder walks away. Chapter 7. Sold up and left, also 1974. At the peak. When Franklin is employing 500 workers, rolling out 200 plus vans a week, and dominating the Australian caravan market, Geoffrey Robertson makes what Time to Rome describes as verbatim, a decision that was to eventually bring about the company's demise. Here's the thing. The specific decision is not disclosed in publicly accessible archives. It was disclosed only in the print Time to Rome Issue 14 archive, and even then only in broad terms. What is known, from Time to Rome, from former employees, from industry consensus, he sold up and left. He was 45 years old. He had built the company from Masonite in his father's pub yard to 200 vans a week over 27 years. And he walked away. He moved to Melbourne. He joined the Royal Victorian Motor Yacht Club at Williamstown. He bought a large boat and named it Aluka. He sailed Port Phillip Bay. He never publicly explained why he sold. The identity of the buyer is not preserved in accessible records. No liquidator, no acquirer name, no sale price has been documented in any archive available today. What is documented is the human aftermath. Verbatim from 20-year Franklin employee Lindsay Copeman. I worked for this man for 20 years, best boss a man could have. When he sold up and left, so did I. It was never the same. It was never the same. Post-Robertson management is not well documented in accessible records. What is documented is the consensus among former employees, industry historians, and the Ballarat community. Franklin under Robertson was a family founder company held together by his personal engineering intuition and his personal relationships with the workers. Franklin, without Robertson, was a company that had lost its centre of gravity. The vans continued to roll out. The Wendouree works continued to hum. The Regent, the Freeway, the Safari, the Arrow, the Hunter, all remained in production. On paper, nothing had changed. But something had. And within 5 years, the crisis would arrive. Chapter 8. The Oil Shock, 1979. Iran. Ayatollah Khomeini overthrows the Shah in the Iranian Revolution. Iranian oil production collapses. The organisation of petroleum. Exporting country's second oil shock begins. World crude prices double in 18 months, reaching approximately $39 a barrel by early 1980. Australia moves to full import parity pricing from 1978 to 79, exposing Australian motorists directly to world prices. And the impact on Australian family motoring is, per the Australian Bureau of Statistics, unprecedented, verbatim. A second global oil price shock in 1979 saw fuel prices rise almost 50%, which remains the largest annual increase in fuel prices recorded in Australia. Almost 50% in a single year, the largest annual fuel price increase ever recorded in this country. To understand what this meant on the ground, the family fuel budget for a long-distance Christmas caravan trip rose by nearly half in a single year. Melbourne to Merimbula, Sydney to Byron Bay, Brisbane to Yeppoon. Every long tow route in the country suddenly cost dramatically more to drive, on top of a base wage that had not moved. That is not a small adjustment. That is a working family decision to cancel the Christmas caravan trip and stay home. The Holden Kingswood, the Ford Falcon, the Chrysler Valiant, the 6-cylinder Australian tow cars that pulled the Australian family caravan holiday tradition, became uneconomic to run for long-distance touring almost overnight. The Australian family caravan holiday died. Not because families stopped wanting to holiday, because the specific ritual of the 6-cylinder Holden pulling a 3-week Christmas caravan trip to Merimbula or Portland or Yeppoon suddenly cost 50% more in fuel than it had the summer before. Caravan demand collapsed, and the Big Five fell together. Millard was forced to sell to Viscount in 1979. Millard's own history, verbatim, it was more bad luck that forced the Darlingtons to sell their assets to Viscount in 1979. Alongside the petrol shortage of the late 70s and skyrocketing petrol prices, Australians were in no mood to buy big cars and tow caravans. Australians were in no mood. Chesney faded. Coronet faded. Viscount would decline through the 1980s and 1990s toward its own eventual collapse. And Franklin, the Ballarat empire that had rolled 200 vans a week 5 years earlier, now without its founder, folded around the end of the decade. The exact closure month is not preserved in accessible archives. A Trove or Ballarat Courier archival search would confirm the specific month and workforce reduction. Consensus among former employees and industry commentators dates the collapse to around 1979 to 1980. Dealer stock trailed into 1982. A Western Australian buyer records purchasing, verbatim, the second last Franklin to be sold in Western Australia in 1982 from Hudson's Caravan Sales in Bunbury. 23 feet, around $11,000. Documented Franklin production runs to a 1979 Hunter model. And then silence. The Wendouree works falls quiet, not to foreign competition, not to imports, to Australia's own petrol economy, destroying Australia's own family caravan holiday ritual. And once that ritual was gone, the industry that depended on it could not survive. Chapter 9. Silence. From around 1980 through 2004, 24 years. The Franklin name lies dormant. The Wendouree works is dismantled or repurposed. The Learmonth Road site eventually transitions. Today, 281 Learmonth Road, Wendouree, is home to BMG Caravans, a Franklin and Fantasies Caravans dealer. A neat modern thread back to the historic road. But the manufacturing is long gone. The Franklin brand, the retro cursive script, the aluminium-clad family van, the Big Five pedigree, disappears from the Australian caravan market. Grey nomads continue to tour Australia in surviving 1970s, Regents, Hunters, Arrows and Safaris, but no new Franklins are built for a generation. Meanwhile, the Australian caravan industry consolidates around a new dominant player. Jayco, founded in 1975 by Jerry Ryan, 5 years before Franklin's collapse, becomes the dominant Australian manufacturer. By the 2000s, Jayco is the market leader. By 2015, Jayco is running 50 acres of factory and building around 11,000 units a year. The market Franklin had once held is absorbed by Jayco, by Caravan, founded 1977, by the Millard Revival, which came in 2001 under Gary Willer and the late Stan Edwards. But the Franklin name, the Ballarat name, stays silent. A retro badge on a 25-year-old van at a Sunday morning garage sale. Nothing more. The families who had bought a Regent in 1972, a Hunter in 1978, a Safari in 1970, those families kept touring. Their vans rolled from the Great Ocean Road to the Nullarbor, restored, repainted, fitted with new upholstery, handed down. But no new Franklins came off any production line. Not for a generation, not for the whole of the 1980s, not for the whole of the 1990s, not for the first 4 years of the 2000s. 24 years of silence in the industry Franklin had once dominated. In Ballarat itself, the disappearance was quiet. There was no protest march, no lobbying for a rescue package. The workers who had built the vans moved on, retired or found other work. The Learmonth Road buildings passed through owners. The neighbourhood around Wendouree carried on. Ballarat as a city does not appear to have marked the collapse. There was no plaque then. There is no plaque now. Meanwhile, the Robertson name, the surname of the founder, disappeared from Australian caravan manufacturing entirely. By the time the factory folded, Robertson had been living in Melbourne for a decade. He gave no interviews about the collapse. He wrote no memoir. Time to Roam appears to have been the only publication he spoke to in any depth, and even then only decades later, and even then only about the founding, not the ending. Whatever he thought about the empire he had built dissolving, he did not say publicly. Chapter 10. The Revival. 2004. Queensland dealer Kratzmann Caravans, based at Burpengari, north of Brisbane, founded in 1987 by Gary Kratzmann with son Clint in the business, buys the dormant Franklin brand. Kratzmann contracts concept caravans of Campbellfield, Melbourne, to build Franklin-badged vans. Concept had been founded in 2004 by Steve Caruso, Bruno Caruso and Keir Smith. The same year, the Franklin brand was revived. Kratzmann and Concept between them sell over 1,000 Franklin-badged vans over the next decade. That figure comes from Keir Smith himself, on the record to industry publication Geoffrey. Then, around 2014, Concept Caravans buys the Franklin brand from Kratzmann outright. Smith's own quote to caravancampingsales.com.au, on the record, verbatim. The relationship changed 3 years ago when Concept purchased Franklin from Kratzmann. Since 2014, we've seen an 80% increase in sales. 80% increase in 3 years. The revival was working. On the 28th of July 2017, Victorian Parliamentary Secretary Frank Maguire cuts the ribbon on a new $3 million Franklin factory at 88 Barry Road, Campbellfield. 2,400 square metres. 35 workers dedicated to Franklin production. 7 vans per week. 5 days per van. 250 man-hours per van, hand-built in the traditional stick and tin method. A $764,000 government grant supports the launch. Victorian and federal governments, plus Ford, part of Ford's post-Broadmeadows closure local jobs program. Concept Managing Director Keir Smith, on the record, verbatim. The history of the Franklin Caravan spans many decades, but in its latest form, this facility allows the rebirth of the iconic brand to spread its reach around the country once again. Rebirth, the word he used. Concept also unveils Chinese-built Franklin camper trailers at the same launch. Franklin becomes Concept's regional and country brand versus the Metro Concept flagship. Franklin models today include Core, Razor, Club, X-Factor, Off-Road Flagship and Limitless. 7 vans per week. In 2024, Concept marks its 20th anniversary with over 180 staff producing Franklin, Newlands and a final irony, Viscount alongside the flagship Concept brand. 3 of the Big 5 now live under one Campbellfield roof, at a fraction of their peak scale. To be honest about what the revival is, it is a legitimate manufacturing operation, not a marketing ghost. Every Franklin that rolls off the Campbellfield line is genuinely Australian-made. Steel, aluminium, plywood, upholstery, electrical, plumbing, all fitted by Australian workers in a Melbourne factory. The vans are hand-built to a standard the original 1970s factory could not match unit for unit. Modern insulation, modern electrics, modern chassis engineering. But it is also, at 7 vans a week from 35 workers, roughly 3% of what the Wendouree works produced at peak. It is Franklin at a fraction of its former scale, closer to the late 1950s than the 1970s. Rebirth is the right word for the badge. It is not the right word for the empire. The empire is not coming back. Chapter 11. The Big Lap, 2026. Walk to 281 Learmonth Road, Wendouree, Ballarat. Where Franklin's Wendouree works once ran 200 vans a week. A dealership. BMG Caravans, selling Franklin and Fantasy. Caravans built elsewhere, in Campbellfield. No plaque for Geoffrey Robertson. No plaque for the 500 Ballarat workers of 1974. No plaque for the Big 5 era. No plaque for the 1947 Masonite prototype. Nothing on the ground. But drive out of Ballarat, north or west, on the Western Highway or up through Bendigo, and you will find Franklin's. Restored 1970s Regents behind Toyota Hiluxes. 1974 Arrows on grey Nomad convoys. 1978 Hunters on caravan park sites at Halls Gap, at Warrnambool, at Robe. The retro Franklin cursive script rolls into every Big 4 park, every free camp, every roadhouse layover from Cairns to Broome. The Big Lap, the great Australian caravan tradition of circumnavigating the country on Highway 1, typically 10 to 12 months, continues. Per Roy Morgan data, Australia had approximately 937,000 recreational vehicles by 2025. The RV market generated approximately $10.45 billion in visitor expenditure. New caravan registrations rose 257% between 1995 and 2005, and another 29% in the 5 years after that. The industry Franklin helped build is bigger than ever. Franklin itself is a shell. 7 vans per week, from Campbellfield. Hand-built, beautifully finished, genuinely Australian-made. But 7, not 200, in a different city, under a different company, with a founder who died before he could tell anyone why he walked away in 1974. The Town Hall Hotel on Armstrong Street, where a 17-year-old built his first van from timber and masonite in 1947, still stands. William Robertson is long gone. His son is long gone. The pub yard where the first van was built is now just a pub yard. The former funeral home at 7 to 9 Dawson Street North is still there. No plaques, no markers, no commemoration, just Ballarat streetscape. Meanwhile, out on the Stuart Highway, a 1974 Franklin Regent rolls north behind a Toyota Land Cruiser. Grey nomad couple in the tow car. Retro Franklin cursive script down the side. Aluminium cladding polished. Interior still in olive and beige linen grain vinyl piped with gold. 52 years old. Still touring. Still humming. Owned now by grey nomads who tracked a rusted Franklin down at a country farm auction, spent years restoring it, and now tow it around Australia in retirement. Restored Regents, freeways, safaris, arrows and hunters roll into every Big Four park, every free camp, every roadhouse layover on Highway 1, some behind Toyotas, some behind Land Cruisers, some behind Kias and Fords, all carrying the retro cursive Franklin script that hasn't been on a new van since 1979. That is Franklin's real legacy, not the 7 vans a week Campbellfield factory. The dozens, possibly hundreds of surviving Wendouree-built Regents, freeways, safaris, arrows and hunters still rolling on Australian roads, carrying the retro cursive Franklin script into every caravan park from Broome to Byron Bay, from Cape York to Warrnambool. The badge outlived the empire. The founder outlived his own decision. And Ballarat outlived the 200 vans a week, but does not remember them on any street sign. Lesson 1. Founders are not replaceable. The industrial South Channel has told stories of Australian factories that fell to many causes. Cleanmade, killed by the young family's fraud. Chrysler, killed by Mitsubishi. Sunbeam, killed by Chainsaw Al Dunlap. Commonwealth Aircraft Corporation, killed by 60 years of Australian government procurement decisions. Halverson, killed by fiberglass and generational succession. Franklin is different from all of them. Because Franklin was killed by its own founder walking away at the peak. Not deliberately, not maliciously. Geoffrey Robertson did not intend to destroy the company he built. He sold up in 1974 at what he must have thought was the summit. 200 vans a week, 500 workers, the biggest caravan brand in Australia. And walked into semi-retirement in Melbourne, sailing his boat Iluka around Port Phillip Bay. The company he left behind was profitable, humming, top of the industry. But it was also, as post-Robertson management would learn, held together by his personal engineering intuition, his personal relationship with the Wendouree workers, his personal understanding of what an Australian family holiday caravan should be. That understanding could not be transferred. Read that again. The 20-year employee's line survives, verbatim. When he sold up and left, so did I. It was never the same. It was never the same. 5 years later, when the oil crisis arrived, the company that would have needed Robertson's founder instinct to survive did not have him. Post-Robertson management ran a company they had inherited, not a company they had built. The difference showed when the 50% fuel price shock landed and the family caravan market collapsed in 18 months. Founders are not replaceable, not in family businesses, not in industrial companies, not in caravan factories in Ballarat. When the founder walks away, for whatever reason at whatever peak, sailing off to Port Phillip Bay, in a boat named Iluka, the company enters a slow-motion terminal decline that may take 5, 10, 25 years to complete. But it starts the day the founder walks out. Lesson 2. The family holiday doesn't come back. In 1974, Australians took their family holidays behind a tow bar. Christmas caravan traffic banked from Sydney to the North Coast, from Melbourne to the Great Ocean Road, from Brisbane to the Gold Coast. And Franklin was the family van. The family caravan holiday, grandparents, parents, kids, 3 weeks of annual leave, the Holden Kingswood, the Franklin Regent behind, was the great post-war Australian ritual. And when the 1979 oil crisis arrived, that ritual died. Not because families stopped wanting to holiday, not because petrol prices stayed high forever, they didn't. But because the specific ritual of the 6-cylinder Holden plus Franklin Regent family holiday depended on cheap petrol. And when Australia's petrol prices rose almost 50% in a single year, the largest annual increase ever recorded in Australia, that ritual could not come back in the same form. The caravan industry survived. Jayco absorbed the family market. Coromon took market share. The Millard revival came in 2001. Concept eventually built Franklin-badged vans in Campbellfield. But the specific 1970s ritual, the Kingswood, the Franklin, the 3-week Christmas caravan trip to Merimbula or Portland or Yeppoon, did not come back. It was replaced by interstate flights, package holidays overseas, and eventually the grey nomad retirement, Big Lap, a different ritual, done by a different generation for different reasons. The Big Lap survived. The family caravan holiday did not. When a national ritual dies, the industries that depended on it do not get a second chance in the same form. They get replaced by different industries serving different rituals. That is what happened to Franklin. That is what happened to the Big Five. That is what happens to any manufacturer whose product depends on a national way of life that shifts. Lesson 3. The badge survives. The empire does not. Model Regent. Ballarat, October 1970. 12 feet 6 inches. 4 berths. 609 kilograms. Aluminium clad. Sandwich panel. Box steel chassis. Made in Wendouree. Sold new for $1,510, approximately $20,000 in 2026 money. 56 years later, restored 1970s. Franklin Regents sell on eBay Australia, Gumtree and Caravan camping sales for anywhere between $12,000 and $30,000, depending on condition. Still on the road, still touring Australia, still rolling into caravan parks, still humming behind Toyota Hiluxes on the Stuart Highway. Restored by hobbyists, vintage caravan restorers, grey nomad retirees, families who bought a rusted 1974 Franklin at a farm auction for $2,000 and spent 3 years and $30,000 turning it into a rolling family heirloom. The badge survives. The specific 1970s Franklin cursive script, the retro aluminium cladding, the olive and beige linen grain vinyl piped with gold, survives. In dozens, possibly hundreds, of surviving examples on Australian roads. Meanwhile, the empire, the Wendouree works, the 500 workers, the 200 vans a week production line, the biggest caravan brand in Australia market share, does not. What survives instead is a $3 million concept-owned Franklin factory at 88 Barry Road, Campbellfield, Melbourne. Building 7 vans per week, hand-built, beautifully finished, genuinely Australian-made, and a shell of what Geoffrey Robertson built in Ballarat between 1947 and 1974. When an industrial empire falls, the badge survives on the artefacts. The empire itself does not as the same empire, not with the same scale, not with the same founder. The badge is a memento. The empire is history. 200 vans a week. Ballarat, 1974. The Big Lap remembers. The Wendouree works does not.